Shigaraki has had a long year already in My Hero Academia with the events of both war arcs in the manga and in the anime. But this time we're going to be discussing the day that Shigaraki met America's #1 hero, otherwise known as one of the strongest heroes in the entire world of the series. But to go over this story, we actually have to go a little back in time to All Might's time in the States. Because this story actually starts with a crew of villains who it seems like recently robbed a bank or something, but they rush down the city streets as we see a young All Might with David's shield and what seems to be like the All Might mobile because it has space for both of them. And All Might jumps off the car, making it go kind of swerving out of control as he jumps into the air using just the sheer power of his limbs to more or less fly up in the air and punch away all the missiles that this villain, who is now jumping off of buildings, has for All Might. Now more of the missiles head towards All Might as he punches them too and ends up kind of going through the large fire explosion that they cause, and that reveals his hero suit at the time, which is definitely different than the one that we see later on in the series, as All Might continues to punch the villain into submission, sending the villain falling down off a Detroit Smash into the ground down below in the city that kind of looks like New York, at least to a certain extent. Now All Might doesn't initially start this battle alone, because we see when the villains initially break out of the casino that they were robbing, other heroes do end up responding to keep the villain from taking the $10 million, but it's really only All Might that's capable of making a difference. And as the villain is trying to get away and jumping over buildings and cop cars and any hero that gets in his way, he nearly lands on a car holding a young family before All Might lands right in front of him just in the nick of time and sends him flying with an amazing punch. Now this is where we get the amazing shot of All Might standing in front of the fire with his jacket kind of flowing in the wind, and I still really want that jacket. Someone let me know where I could find that jacket. But little did we know at that time that we were seeing the birth of a hero. And that's because after the events of My Hero Academia's war arc, we do see a large-scale prison break operation led by All For One, where various characters like Stain, Muscular, and Overhaul do end up escaping prison and getting back out onto the Japanese streets, and you can watch my video about that by clicking the card in the top right, where I go over the whole Tartarus incident report hour by hour, discussing how all of that went down. But you can imagine that having all these different villains escaping all these different prisons eventually ended up leaving Japan in a very sorry state. Now, in an attempt to kind of come and help Japan because no one else seemed like they were trying to, we have America's #1 hero, Kathleen Bate, otherwise known as Star and Stripe, standing on top of a stealth bomber as they make their way at top speed towards Japan. But this is where elsewhere we see All For One starting the monologue about his final grand plan and detailing where exactly things are in those plans. All For One says that he's laid out plans that span lifetimes, and now as we wind down the clock on this grand plan, we are approached by our greatest hurdle and our greatest opportunity. Spinner seems to wonder what All For One means by greatest hurdle and greatest opportunity, and that's where All For One replies, Star and Stripes, the world's strongest woman. She hails from the home of the heroes, the land of the free, and sits at the zenith of heroes all around the world. Underhanded tricks won't work on her. If someone like her were to intervene, there's no doubt we would be in trouble. But if I were to get my hands on her quirk, well, the rest is history, as they'd say. And that's where we see Hawks and Best Jeanist driving down the highway near what seems to be the ocean, as we see Endeavor in the sky also flying near them because they're all coordinating a way to meet Star and Stripes as she heads over to America, with Hawks telling us it seems like she's going to be entering our airspace shortly, so as soon as she gets here we'll be able to meet her and kind of set up some countermeasures for All For One and all the stuff that's going on. But it's then when they get a report from Tsukauchi that something is wrong. I just received word that there's something else in the airspace around 50 kilometers away from their planned landing spot. It's him. He's arrived. And as the camera rushes towards the ocean and the sky beyond, we see a figure floating in the air, waiting for Star and Stripes and her battalion of stealth bombers, covered in a dark and tattered cloak with his hair longer than we've ever seen before flowing in the wind. It's Shigaraki, now healed from the events of My Hero Academia's war arc. And Shigaraki pulls up here with an all-new fit, with Shigaraki actually wearing what seems to be like a suit, very much reminiscent of All For One, but he also does have his big ragged cloak, which I wonder if that's his costume from the My Villain Academia arc, now just sort of wrapped around him in a cool way. And of course, this is meant to signify the fusion between All For One and Shigaraki, which is now more complete than it's ever been, with Shigaraki of course wearing a very All For One style suit and still still having part of his outfit being the other half of the outfit so he can maintain his identity. But Star and Stripe kind of finds it funny that someone made it all the way up here to greet her, and she goes, "You must be one free guy to come up all this way up here to greet me." But Shigaraki just stares her down with a deadpan expression, not saying anything. As Star and Stripe realizes, "Are you the villain they call All for One?" And Shigaraki responds, "Well, who am I indeed?" We see one of Star's pilots say, "Negative Star, that's Shigaraki Tamura, and it seems like he can use EMP blast, so all units need to deploy their force fields right now, and everyone needs to turn off autopilot just in case he EMPs us. You have to be in control of your ship." And that's when Star says that there's only one option left here, and that's to smash their way through. So all the jets take a formation of Star still standing on front of one of them as she says it's time to exterminate a villain. And she promises her crew that if any of them don't make it, she'll at least make sure that their body gets back to their families with no man getting left behind. But at the same time, on the other side of the battlefield in the sky, Shigaraki has a strange conversation with himself. He goes, "What is this weird sensation? I know for a fact that I'm Shigaraki Tamura, but at the same time, I'm undoubtedly myself too," kind of playing off that weird battle of the wits between Shigaraki and All for One for this body. And here we see a weird situation where now it seems like their consciousness has fused so much that whoever the main personality is really can't differentiate between who's in control, right? It seems like a true proper fusion between both personalities has taken its effect here. And that's really not good for Star and Stripe, because that kind of means that Shigaraki has all the knowledge of how to use the quirks that are in All for One, whereas before he didn't really quite understand how to use all of them to their best effect, and we ended up seeing All for One have to take over to use them in better ways to get advantages over on the heroes in the war arc. Shigaraki uses 3 quirks together, which are Radio Waves, Push, and Load Up, and as Star screams for everyone to dodge, we see a massive burst of energy coming from Shigaraki's hand, sort of like a Kamehameha wave, just absolutely devastating a large area above the clouds, and we even see a large section of the clouds getting pushed back from this attack. And as the battle truly begins, we see Shigaraki being arrogant and joking around with Star and Stripes, going, "Who do you think's gonna get the first touch in, Miss America?" But Star and Stripes responds and says, "Even if I knew what other hidden abilities you have in store for me, I have no need to prepare for them, because that's what it means to truly be the strongest." And at this point, Star and Stripe begins to use her quirk, New Order. And let me tell you, this is, I guess besides All for One and One for All, and even maybe more so than both those quirks, the most broken quirk that we've seen in the world of My Hero Academia. And here's how we see it used for the first time. Star lets some air slip through her fingers as her hand is in front of her, and as she grips it, she says, "Atmosphere. From here to 100 meters in front of me, the atmosphere will cease to exist." And this pretty much creates a 100-meter zone of harsh space-like conditions, meaning Shigaraki has no way of breathing or anything in this large area between him and Star and Stripe. And that's just the scary nature of her quirk, right? Star and Stripes is able to touch something or grab something and imply a rule on it as long as she knows its name. So by touching the air in the atmosphere, she was able to use a rule to completely just make the air within a certain distance go away. And as Shigaraki gasps for air, trying to get a hold of himself as his eyes start popping and all sorts of madness occurs with his body, he says, "What a horrifying quirk. I want it." As he's pelted from every direction by various different lasers. But the issue is, Shigaraki here again does have a good handle of the usage of All for One, so he's able to use the reflection and refraction quirks to send these lasers flying back at Star and Stripe and all the jets nearby. Now, having a really quick reaction speed, Star and Stripe actually makes contact with the laser as it's hitting her and imposes a rule on the laser, screaming out, "Laser! I can hold lasers." And she starts pretty much catching the laser like it's a rubber beam, just showing again that Star and Stripe is just massively powerful, because this is a very creative quirk. Now, the second that Star and Stripe uses her rule on the laser, the giant vacuum area actually comes undone, and Shigaraki uses the spring-like limbs quirk as well as his All Might level power to jettison himself towards Star and Stripe like we saw All Might doing in that first scene in the video. Now, as Shigaraki rockets himself towards Star and Stripe, she actually launches herself off the jet that she's on top of and punches Shigaraki square in in the face, kind of catching him midair and sends him flying. And that's where she begins to activate the conditions of her quirk, since now she's made contact with Shigaraki. So she screams out, "Shigaraki Tamura." If Shigaraki Tamura were to move even an inch from this point onwards, his heart will stop. And it's here where we learn more about the tie between Star and Stripe and All Might. She says, "A long time ago, I was saved by a Japanese exchange student while I was with my family near Santa Monica Pier. A runaway villain attacked us in our car, and as I welcomed death, I had only one thought left. Someone at least save my sister." That's when the events at the beginning of the video took place, and of course All Might ended up saving Star and Stripe. And we know because of this situation, Star and Stripe more or less considered All Might to be her spiritual master, or I guess not really her master, because it's not like he taught her how to use her quirk or her abilities, but she just pretty much looked at him like her master in spirit. But as Shigaraki listens to this, he realizes, oh no, I'm caught. She has me now. But in that moment, something very unexpected started to happen. Shigaraki's hair would actually start to grow really fast and rapidly as he coughed up blood and started to scream, and then we saw a large explosion of electricity and energy occurring, sending Star and Stripe flying backwards. And as Star and Stripe gets thrown back, very confused, wondering what's going on with Shigaraki and the fact that his hair grew, Shigaraki actually stands up, going, "Now I get how New Order works. It may be a really supreme quirk, but it's still constrained by rules of its own." And this is where we realize that Star is actually in a very tough situation here, because yes, normally that would have worked on Shigaraki since he is Shigaraki Tamura, but the issue is, since Star and Stripe hasn't made it to All Might, she doesn't really have the information that Shigaraki is actually named Tenko Shimura. That is actually not his name. And even beside that, we also have the situation going on of Shigaraki's true personality melding of All for One, so even he doesn't really know whether or not he's Shigaraki Tamura, All for One, or Tenko Shimura right now in his mind. This makes it so Star and Stripe's quirk doesn't actually work on Shigaraki, and she's not going to be able to just get an easy win here by making contact with him and just ending the fight that way. She's actually going to have to fight him into submission. But Star and Stripe really doesn't understand what's going on, right? And in her head, she thinks that maybe he just has some way to get around attacks that hamper his breathing, because he survived the big vacuum attack and he survived her order constricting his breathing. And that's when we see that Star and Stripe feels like the situation has actually gotten very dire, so she puts in a call to the commander to have him send missiles from America all the way over to Japan to try to hit Shigaraki with those, because she feels like at this point Shigaraki has graduated from just being Japan's threat, and now since he's putting up such a fight against her, he's kind of a threat against the entire world. And this is where we see this battle truly escalate to a level that we've never seen in My Hero Academia before. Because as Shigaraki lands on his flying Hayanomo and starts making his way towards Star and Stripe, she grabs the atmosphere again and says the air forms into my shape, but 1,000 times bigger. And we see a massive, giant Star and Stripe made out of air standing through the clouds above the ocean, getting ready to attack Shigaraki. And Shigaraki says that even though nothing is visible in front of him, because it's not like Shigaraki can see the giant shape of Star and Stripe made out of air, he can tell something dangerous is coming. And we see the giant air Star and Stripe punching Shigaraki at full speed like a regular Star and Stripe punch, as she kind of puppets the giant with her actual body. And this is where Star and Stripe's tactic has completely changed, because she realizes, hey, I'm taking too much damage in this fight against this guy, and that's kind of pointless, and he's not going to tell me his name, right? I'm not going to be able to figure that out in this battle, so all I can do now is just use my quirk in the most oppressive way that I possibly can to just break this guy down to atoms so he can't regen anymore. It's at this point where she lets out a massive sonic clap, kind of taking a page out of Hulk's book, and as the large giant does the same, we see a massive air beam just kind of hitting Shigaraki as all the clouds around him over the ocean are completely blown away at the impact of force, hitting his body and making him ragged. But Shigaraki's body doesn't completely fall apart yet, as he continues to get sent flying through the ocean. But Star and Stripe, seeing this and realizes that she needs even more juice, call for all the jets to hit her with their lasers, as she says the lasers all combine into one, and we see the giant giant air version of Star and Stripe grab the lasers like a giant lightning bolt from Zeus and pierce it down like a staff or a javelin straight into Shigaraki, straight through the earth and into the ocean. And we see Shigaraki just slowly getting evaporated with the strength of this laser beam. But Star says even this is not going to be enough, because if this was enough, then Endeavor should have been able to finish the job, right? His firepower is stronger, or at least comparable to the power of these lasers and the power of this attack. And this is actually where we start to see that the state-of-the-art hypersonic intercontinental cruise missiles are actually on the way, and they're named Tiamat, which is ironically one of the characters from Horikoshi's last manga, Barrage, so I really like to see that those were worked into the story here. And this is where we start to get more backstory on the hero. We see that in what seems to be some sort of military training with the rest of her jet squad, she does have some cuts and bruises, and she seems a little angry at the fact that it seems like she lost the combat against her fellow teammate. And this is where Star tells us that at a glance her quirk seems to be capable of anything, but there was always a hard limit when it came to powering herself up. No matter what sort of rule she tried, it never worked out right. So at this stage in her life, despite the fact that she can make herself way stronger with her quirk, it's not enough to make her so strong that she's just head and shoulders dominant over other people. But her jet fighters say, hey, even when your quirk isn't enough for you to do things on your own, no worries, just rely on us and we'll always be there for you so we can get everything done together. They say that it's got nothing to do with her being a girl and that's just how her quirk is, but she's really the only person capable of catching up to All Might because they're both beasts. And it's here where Star and Stripe smiles, because she knows at the very least she never heard the words "you're just a girl, that's just how it is" from her fellow teammates. Now, back in real time, we see that the giant version of Star and Stripe is still holding down the laser beam on Shigaraki, but Shigaraki thinks that she must know that this isn't doing all that much to me. This united laser blast is only meant to stun lock me via relentless damage, all of which tells me she realizes that without a single attack powerful enough to vaporize me, that this is pointless, so she has to be waiting for something that packs an even bigger punch than this. But as Shigaraki continues to evaporate and regen at the same time, Star and Stripe's plan comes to fruition. With the intercontinental missiles finally making it to their destination, Star and Stripe has to use a rule on the missiles to grab them, but at the same time when she does that, that's going to mean that she has to take the rules off of the laser beams that are holding down Shigaraki. So in that moment, she catches all the different missiles coming her way with the giant Star and Stripe Guardian, and all the different jets fire, shooting their lasers downwards towards Shigaraki, who shoots out of the water like a bat out of hell, trying to make his way to Star and Stripes, but he ends up actually getting rebuffed by all these different lasers. Now in that moment, Star and Stripes grabs all the different missiles and uses the rule on them, saying that they are redirected, and actually spins them using the giant Star and Stripes Guardian, punching them into the ground all at once at Shigaraki using state-of-the-art hypersonic intercontinental cruise missile punch. As we see a massive, and I mean massive, explosion over the ocean of Japan that completely clears the skies and makes a giant circle of clouds around the area, big enough for even Endeavor to see it off the shore. But in this large, sparking, fiery crater in the center of the ocean, which is now just completely blown away, right? We have the ocean kind of struggling to fill in this space which was burned away from these missiles. We see a small hole in the ground, and it seems like coming out of it is Shigaraki, who somehow survived this missile attack even though almost all of his flesh is coming off. And that's when everyone realizes that what came out of the ocean flying like a bat out of hell actually wasn't Shigaraki, it was the flying high-end Nomu that actually ended up getting hit by most of the lasers and the large explosion from Star and Stripe. So Shigaraki commands the high-end Nomu to burst, and it explodes, causing widespread disarray in Star and Stripe's formation as Shigaraki jumps and darts from plane to plane, jumping towards Star and Stripe, and as she floats in the air with her large air guardian, being able to actually take Shigaraki out using the Guardian and squish the giant jet that he's standing on, she thinks of her friends and realizes that she's not going to take them out just to take out this villain, and that it likely wouldn't have done anything in the first place. So Star doesn't end up doing her last attack, and we see that sadly, Shigaraki reaches her and puts his hand on her face. And as Shigaraki's hand lands on Star and Stripe's face, he pulls away, pulling her quirk out of her body. But as he pulls his hand away, it seems like Shigaraki used decay on Star and Stripe at the same time that he was stealing her quirk. But in her last moments of having her quirk, she says, "I, Kathleen Bate, will not decay," in a kind of desperate effort to keep herself from decaying away as her quirk is stolen. And this is where Shigaraki calls Star and Stripe an idiot because he was able to steal her quirk by pretty much decaying her and absorbing her quirk at the same time, meaning that she had to choose which one she was going to protect. And by protecting her body using her quirk, she ended up losing her quirk and now has to suffer being decayed as well. And it's at this moment where Shigaraki readies a never before seen fire quirk. It looks like he's actually about to use like Flash Fire Fist or something, and he says, "New order, the atmosphere shall," but it seems like he gets cut off by something going on inside, but I bet he was going to make the atmosphere flammable between him and Star and Stripe and then burn it using his quirk, doing something just amazingly powerful. It probably would have been a massive explosion, but thankfully something ends up going wrong here because the fight is not over. Inside of the Vestige world, we actually see a completely healed Star and Stripe staring down Shigaraki as he walks with All for One and his body fusing together, and outside of the Vestige world, we see Shigaraki's body kind of blowed up in a nasty and disgusting way as it then starts to explode all around. And all over him, Tamura's body begins to break apart as he realizes, "My quirks are rupturing inside me." And this is where we learn that Star actually set up a trap beforehand just in case her quirk was taken by All for One, saying that New Order will revolt against the other quirks inside of All for One. And that's where Shigaraki, or I guess All for One, is in a very, very unprecedented situation, right? Because all of All for One's life, he's only know that quirks are given and taken, but they're never destroyed. So this is kind of unseen and ridiculous, and it's an impossible situation only possible by the interaction of these very specific characters. Now, Shigaraki tries to give New Order away to one of the pilots, but they all laser him down, and he's actually not really able to respond to this, to the point where now the lasers are actually starting to do damage to Shigaraki, and he's actually in a lot of trouble. It's then when we see Star and Stripe finally decaying away, thinking about the time that All Might saved her and watching her jets kind of finish the battle against Shigaraki. And at this point, with his body falling apart, Shigaraki calls on the quirk of the high-end Nomu that he was flying with earlier that he stole before, and starts flying away towards Japan as Star and Stripe inside of his body starts ripping him and All for One apart from each other and all the different quirks that they have. Now, Shigaraki crash lands into the house of two random villains, and as Shigaraki puts his hand on this guy's face trying to give him New Order so he can have a break and figure out what to do here, he realizes that New Order is actually gone, because it seems like from fighting all the different quirks that are inside All for One, they managed to eventually destroy the quirk New Order that was kind of like a virus inside of Shigaraki before all of his quirks were deleted. But this makes it so that Shigaraki, yes, he did win against Star and Stripe and end up taking her out, but he didn't end up getting the one thing that he wanted the most from the situation, which was the quirk, and he ended up actually losing some of his quirks to this battle. With Star and Stripe saying that as long as people are still willing to help each other, the will of a hero will be passed on, and someone will definitely arrive to take down All for One and put an end to Shigaraki. And inside of Shigaraki, we see a really, really angry All for One, like a very furious All for One, saying, "Get out of my body, you corpse," as the Star and Stripe within All for One starts to fade away. But we see deeper inside, Tenko Shimura is still in there, very much like how Deku saw him, but he's being covered and constricted by hands, struggling to make his way out of the Shigaraki and All for One personality. Now, this battle wasn't for nothing, because eventually we would get the data from the battle between Star and Stripes that was recorded on the jets that she was fighting with, given over to the heroes and All Might for the final battle, and this also gave the heroes more time to prepare because they were supposed to fight Shigaraki the day after this happened, but because of the damage that happened to his body from the Star and Stripe fight, they ended up delaying the events of the final war arc by at least another week, which was the final time extension that the heroes got leading up to that final battle. But that, guys, was the story of the time that Shigaraki found, met, and defeated America's #1 hero, and that was an amazing battle that I don't think we're going to make it to in Season 6 of My Hero Academia. I think it would be an amazing surprise, just like the high-end versus Nomu fight in the last episode of Season 4, I believe, but I just don't know whether or not to count on seeing it, so I did want to do this video covering the fight, kind of continuing our series in covering different stories in My Hero Academia, and let me know in the comment section below what you want to hear of next. You can check for a playlist of all these different stories that I've been going over, and I love you guys. It's Pineapple. I'll see you next time. Peace.